I didn't know you could do that.
Oh, right. This is sharing maybe the wrong screen here. There we go. That should be correct. All right. Welcome back to the Protocol Town Hall. It's a guest talk series every 2 weeks focused on protocols and protocol research. Today we are talking with Simon de la Rouviere about seeing SCP as a narrative protocol. Our next talk will be November 25th with researcher Dorian Taylor talking about his Summer of Protocols research project titled Retrofitting the Web. You can find the program calendar along with other information at summerofprotocols.com. And with that, I will pass it off to Venkat to introduce Simon for us today.
All right. It's great to have Simon on board. I've been following him on social media for a while, and it's hard to describe what he's up to. I'm on his newsletter, Scenes with Simon. That's the main way I know him, which is a very interesting sort of ongoing commentary on metafiction, things that are happening sort of with narrative theory, experiments with narratives, and all that sort of thing. And he also is at the forefront of experimenting with crypto and AI technologies for art and narrative. And I believe, Simon, you're also a developer and a technologist as well. You've done stuff with like tokenomics and things. So all over the place. So like a lot of us, I think in the protocol space, we have like 10 identities, I think. So with that, over to you, Simon, and let's talk about SCP, whatever that is.
Cool. Okay, let me share my screen. Wait, I'm not seeing Keynote here. Oh wait, I need to exit this one. 1 second. Here we go. And Josh, the screen is the right way around. You're gonna see the presenter. Okay, cool.
Yeah, we're
Awesome.
good.
Okay, great. So I can start. Yeah, thanks for the introduction. I think that's a good way to describe it. Sometimes I don't actually know precisely what I'm doing. I do a lot of things and I enjoy a lot of things. And I've been in the crypto space for a few years. Well, I started coding in 2013 actively, so maybe a bit more than a few years. And since 2019, I've always done writing, but since 2019, I've gone a bit deeper into just fiction and writing fiction and trying to fail fiction, trying to write more fiction, trying to get stuff published, doing short stories, editing short stories, producing short stories. And recently I'm writing a new book. So just been enjoying this sort of intersection, but due to the fact that I did a lot of work in the crypto space, tokenomics and so on, I've been just paying attention to things that have been happening and trying to see if there are like parallels in terms of like what's been happening in the sort of creative fiction space and what we can take from that, and trying to see where there are sort of ways to combine the things that is out there on the web. So the talk for today, I'm going to cover a project called SCP, and also kind of just trying to distill it down into defining kind of the protocol elements of it, and then trying to see if there's things that we can take from it, sort of lessons to creative and collaborative fiction writing. So to start, I'll just give some background on SCP. So SCP stands for Secure, Contain, Protect, and it's a collaborative, creative fiction community that started roughly around 2007, 2008. It branched from one of the 4chan boards, I think it was /paranormal. And it's a collaborative creative fiction project that primarily lives and works around a wiki. And the sort of goal of this project is that it's sort of a clandestine foundation tasked with managing anomalies in our real world. And it's all fiction. It's not sort of like flat earther kind of process. It's like it's supposed to be fiction. And there's a bunch of Wikipedia-like pages that are kind of reports on various anomalies. And so in one of these wiki pages that in this project, it usually describes like what's called containment procedures. It's like, how is this sort of anomaly supposed to be contained? There's a description of the anomaly, and then it usually has like a class. Safe is safe. Euclid is that it's mildly dangerous, and Keter class is like it's very dangerous to like could it be existential for humanity. And you have things like Taumiel class, which is an SCP that's used to contain other SCPs. And then neutralized and decommissioned, pretty explanatory. And Polyon class, for example, is a SCP that's about to be, get out of its containment. And an Archon class SCPs are ones or anomalies where it's not useful to contain them because doing so can cause more damage. It could sometimes be like reality defining. Like if we contain it, then it destroys part of our consensus reality. And then you have, in this fictional world, you have these mobile task forces that are deployed to catalog, to research, and to contain these anomalies within this foundation. And then over time, it sort of developed additional what's called groups of interest that are sort of different views on these anomalies. Like the Chaos Insurgency is a group that wants to use these anomalies as weapons. And things like Serpent's Hand, which thinks or believes that these anomalies should have rights and that we are hurting these anomalies and they should have equal rights in our society. We shouldn't be containing them. We should be trying to live as equals with the anomalies. So I'll go through some examples of the things that people have written. Yesterday I went through a bunch of them again just to see, and it's really fun and interesting that what people come up with. So this was the first one that was created, SCP-173, and the short description is it's a line of sight concrete monster. There used to be an image attached to this, but for licensing reasons, it was removed. But in this case, it's like basically just a concrete monster that you have to maintain line of sight with. Otherwise, it will immediately turn around on you and like snap your neck. Gruesome. Another one. This one is quite interesting because there's something that I'll touch upon later with this one. But SCP-55 is also one of the popular ones. It's an anti-meme, which is just sort of this anomaly that kind of edits itself out of the minds of people. So people the foundation always kind of forgets that this thing exists. And I'll touch upon this one later as well, because it became quite popular, the principle of an anti-meme. Another one, SCP-87, it's this sort of creepypasta horror definition of one's childhood basement, where there's just an infinite basement into the darkness, and these mobile task forces have tried to go down the staircase, but it seems to go on forever. And in this case, in this one, there's actually another SCP living in the staircase, which has it's just a hovering face. This is probably my favorite one, which is there's an alternate reality massive IKEA store, where it basically opens up into this massive store where there's like a civilization that's been developed in it, and there's also other SCPs living in it. And I just, I think anyone that's been into like big box stores have imagined what it would be like to actually live in these places, and see a civilization developed out of a store. So this is probably one of my favorite ones. You get like strange ones like the first person toaster. You can't refer to it except in the first person. And then later on, these were kind of like some of the first ones. You can see it's like a very standard format, but then people started getting more creative. This one is a cave that in Joppa, Indiana, that when you go into it, you go to an alternate reality 2016. And you can see some extra descriptions like like disruption class or risk class. And later on, people also started doing things like they create these terminal-like experiences. I think this probably some form of JavaScript where you can scroll and it's like it feels like you're interacting with a terminal, not with a wiki page. And so people started to become quite creative in like creating these SCPs. Behind sort of digging deeper in them, as kind of like expected, all the IP that's generated with this, it's CC by SA, which is you can do anything with it, even commercial uses. And I'll give you some examples of what people have done. And then share alike. So obviously any derivatives that you make needs to share the license. There's one interesting principle with this project is that there is no canon, but there are many canons. So people they refer to SCPs in sort of this universe, and they self-reference things. They write stories, and so it kind of develops like different kind of canons, groups of interest and things related to each other. Some of them are just standalone too. And from this basis, people have started writing stories, video games, YouTube videos, even films from this baseline. And probably one of the most popular sort of books or tales that came from it is a book from the author Sam Hughes. It's called There Is No Anti-Memetics Division, which has been on my to read list for quite a while. So I still need to read this, but in this case, the author took that SCP-55 and actually turned it into a full tale or book that they created. People have also used the IP to create video games. This was like right at the right time when people started creating YouTube videos of people playing scary games. And so SCP was like a perfect sort of breeding ground for people to play these games, and like it's great content to watch, and also like people getting scared and frightened, and YouTubers leaning into that. But then there's also a huge class of like YouTube content that is just sort of taking the wiki pages and making videos about them. Here's a video from 8 years ago. There's like 14 million views. It just goes through what the author thinks is like the top 22 scariest ones. And then people have also used these SCPs to create actual forms from them, short forms. Like here's one, has 11 million views on YouTube. It's about SCP-96. So it's created this fertile creative fiction experiment where it's allowed people to contribute in unique different ways. And I think especially with creatives that want to try something new but they don't yet have an audience, this has always been a place where people can experiment. It's like I want to create a short film, but I know I don't have an audience, but I can use this open IP from SCP that already has a market to create a short film, cut my teeth on this process, but then also have something that I hope people can watch and enjoy. And there's a bunch of games. I also went to Steam recently also just to check out how many games there are. And there's like things like a game about like a cat that doesn't have half a body. And so people seem to be enjoying like playing with this world that's created here. From a sort of protocol perspective, how it works in practice, anyone can, right? You literally just have to sign up for a Wikidot account and pick one. So they have these number ranges. You pick a number and then just create a wiki page. The sort of minimum requirements for a page is just that it needs to have a number, needs to have a class of containment, like that safe Euclid getter. It needs to contain containment procedures and then just a description. That's like the bare minimum. But obviously as the project has gone on, there's been like a lot more sort of community related requirements have become more in depth. People are expecting more, not just like these simple wiki pages. As I said, like other classifications that have been developed, like disruption risk, risk, threat levels, and so on. And once it's published, there's like a rating system. If it gets less than -10 votes, the staff can come in and prune and delete it. But there's no, if you stick to like basic policies of like, don't troll, don't harass, like just basic stuff, it's predominantly just voted on based on the quality of the page. And there's actually been something I'll talk about later, sort of a way for people to sort of test whether the thing will be good before they try actually create a wiki page. But for the most part, it works like a normal Wikipedia. Anyone can come and create one, but if it's not good, it will get pruned and deleted. I was interested to see what their policies are in using AI, and currently it's not allowed. You can use grammar tools, but not like generative text. Out of curiosity, I actually tried it to see what it would come up with. So yesterday I was like, took a photo of my printer, and then I just asked ChatGPT to write about what this is, and it was bare minimum scary, as in like, oh, here's a printer that like prints stuff from alternate realities. I mean, I guess it tried, but it's not too good. It's not too good, but it tried. And in terms of like how it's run in the background, and the staff is entirely volunteer organization. And there's like many teams and tasks like dealing with like licensing related things, potentially doing like takedowns for certain reasons, disciplinary committees, like critique committees, and so on. And the sort of critique process is interesting because they've developed a way for people to get feedback before they actually go to like the main arena of the Wikipedia. It's the wiki itself to publish stuff. And they have this process where you can get critique, put drafts up, get reviews in the forums before you actually go to the main thing. But it's not required. You don't have to go through this green light policy. And in terms of like how it's funded, I think what I found was that it's basically hosted on Wikidot, which is a platform for wikis, on like a pro account, which apparently costs like $100 a year. But I think SCP is Wikidot's biggest customer, and they put ads on the SCP wiki. So in terms of the project itself, it's not a lot of requirement to run from a financial perspective, and Wikidot takes revenue from there. And based on these kind of principles, I wanted to like drive down about why I think it works or why it works in practice. And, we're in 2023 and there's been a lot of kind of collaborative attempts at writing fiction. Why is this one of them that kind of stuck around? Because it's still ongoing today. What are the reasons why it has succeeded? And I think one of the reasons why I see it as a protocol is that because it really leaned into using the concept of a wiki or the wiki page as like its base principle for writing fiction. Because the idea of a foundation writing reports, publishing it in one-page formats is very sort of attached to this specific shared story universe. And it works specifically well with wikis or Wikipedia pages. So it was an established medium and that people understood. If you're a person on the internet today, you know what the wiki page looks like and how it kind of like functions in principle. I think one of the most important reasons as well why this works is because people know how to contribute. People do understand how a wiki works, and they understand that how they would contribute is not necessarily sort of an open-ended call to contribute, but it's like you contribute by writing a wiki page with these specific parameters that's necessary. It's open IP. You could probably say that this thing can kind of work with closed IP, but I think if it's just a volunteer organization doing all this work, then open IP works the best because that's the way to attract contributions, especially if you wanted to maintain like this sort of off the wall feeling. The theme, I think, is really important because it's inspired by the everyday. I think we've all grown up with like horror, or like, maybe as a kid you were scared of the dark or scared of the the creepy crawly, or whatever you call it in America, the thing in the pool that chases you. Um, and that it's important because that inspiration is always around. You always kind of sometimes see things which is, ooh, that's strange, or ooh, that's odd, momentarily. And so the theme helps a lot because you keep being aware of it. So you could be like, once you're aware of SCP, then you also might see things in your world which you can see and say, hey, this would look great SCP. Like, what if you go for a walk and you see like a strange cloud, and then, oh, that could be an SCP because it's not a cloud, it's actually like a hidden anomaly in the cloud, for example. It's interesting that one of the bigger forks of this project is something called Wanderer's Library. And instead of focusing on sort of horror and the paranormal, it focuses on wonder. So it focuses on things in our world that evoke wonder. So it could be things like fairies or elves or sprites or whatever that exist in our world, but it's not, ooh, creepy, this is going to destroy reality kind of stuff. I think it's important that there isn't canon in a protocol like this, mostly because if you decide to have a canonization process, you can add too much friction to contributions. Basically, you could be creating canon too early, or trying to canonize too early. I think the fact that it keeps it flexible keeps it interesting, but it obviously is necessary. It obviously works well in context with the theme. Like if it was maybe a fantasy world, shared story universe in a fantasy world, it's kind of like incongruous that you don't have real defined canon. And the fact that there's like only thin curation and pruning works well, so it keeps up the quality, but it doesn't necessarily just remove potential contributors from joining and writing these SCPs, so on. And if you take this sort of distillation specific to SCP and you want to say, hey, what if I want to take this idea and apply it to, say, different kind of story universe, or I'm thinking of wanting to create a new kind of narrative protocol that can thrive in the same way SCP has thrived. I've tried to go a bit deeper again and try to distill this into a set of principles, which I think can be used or seen as useful rules if you want to create a narrative protocol. So number one, I think obviously open IP is paramount in here, especially in the early days when you want just anyone to come contribute. The medium for contribution is very known and clear. The primary contribution in the case of SCP are these wiki pages, and that will always be the case. It won't change. But that being said, I think something that's important is that you if possible in a narrative protocol, to have sort of a layers or scale of contributions so that people can come in and contribute by the time that they have or resources that they have. So you kind of have to ask your question, what can I add to this project that is 5 minutes of work to like the extreme of like maybe years of work? And so, a wiki page, if you know what you're doing, can maybe be done in a day or two. So that's kind of the principle. To like maybe months and months to maybe a year of work is to create a short film based on these kind of SCPs. And something I thought that the SCP project can do to incentivize like lower scale of contributions of work is to have, for example, an idea where people can spot things that look anomalous, but they don't know if they are. It's kind of sort of field operatives trying to see if there's something odd in the world around you. Then people that want to write a wiki page can go and say, hey, yes, that photo of a trash can you uploaded is actually an SCP. So let's create a wiki page from it. That allows people to go, I only have 5 minutes of work. I spotted something weird on my walk today. Does anyone have an idea to maybe write something about this thing? Let's take it from there. So I think the scale of contributions can help as well. This was probably the one part of it that I'm not 100% convinced of, but I think in the case of SCP, the fact that it has some center the wiki itself as being the primary source for everything else around it helps. If it was too decentralized, people might not know where to find sort of the source of the stories. Even though someone can come to YouTube, watch all the videos of the SCPs on YouTube, and never go to the wiki, they know that the wiki is there, and that's where the source really comes from. So I think there's some interplay here where there needs to be some defined center of this protocol, a sort of place where this stuff can happen and will remain. I think it's important that a narrative protocol where you expect contributions from people needs to have a passive theme. And so what I mean by passive theme is a theme that allows people to kind of inadvertently stumble upon contributions. So in this case, with horror and like creepypasta and things like that being something that's always present in our lives, like that is something that's always in the back of your head. It's like, oh, that's this scary thing that I could potentially contribute. So it's kind of passively always there. An active theme, for example, can be something like you decide to create a story universe that is classic fantasy, high fantasy, orcs and elves, but we don't think about orcs and elves on our day to day. Like you're not riding the subway and go, I'm thinking about orcs for no apparent reason, but you can be riding a subway and the car stops in the middle and the power goes off because there's cycling power. That's like a creepy experience that maybe there was some anomaly involved here. So passive theme helps. Thin curation, I think, is also important. Again, this is probably more useful in the beginning when your primary goal is just to get to sustainability. And I think it's again, I think it matters on the theme whether you want to define canon or not. But I think it's more likely that a narrative protocol will succeed if you're not going to like split hairs on like what is canon and what's not. And I think if you choose to have a narrative protocol where canon is important, then you run the risk of like adding too much friction to like the process. But that being said, I think there are potentially sort of social rituals that can be interesting, that can add to the feeling or meaning of the project and thus attract more contributors if there is a process of canonization. But I think that needs to be like very specific, maybe to the theme that is important. Like maybe like, ooh, what if there's like a yearly conference and everyone that wrote stuff goes to this place and then they define the canon as like a social experience for fun, you know? So I think that's also kind of like a question mark about canon. In the kind of inverse of what I think would be lead to failures of a narrative protocol, like creative collaborative fiction, is when you try to invite collaboration without clear direction. I think I've seen a few times where people have tried collaborative fiction, but they kind of just go, you have like a primary contributor and say, come and write stuff. But it's like, but how? What am I supposed to write? It's like, am I supposed to just give a paragraph? I think we've seen some of this in like the NFT projects in the past 2-3 years, where it's just they try to build these story worlds on top of it, and they try to invite collaboration from people, but they don't make it obvious in how people are supposed to contribute. I think that's a big one. Again, related to NFT projects as well, is that mixed IP can also cause a lot of problems, where people aren't sure in what sense their contributions will be able to be used or not used, or commercialized or not commercialized. Sticking to one or the other, I think, is better. I think somewhere in the middle would then always cause confusion or actual legal problems that could crop up in the future. In the case of SCP, there was only because the first SCP had an unlicensed photo in it that the person decided you can use it, but then later on they said, look, like we're going to remove this image because then everything can be classified as Creative Commons. So let's just go with that. Stick with everything being Creative Commons. If the theme is flat, like I said before, it can be easily forgotten. It's powerful that the reason why this works is because it's extremely horror and paranormal is extremely pervasive. You can curate before it matters. Again, this is a point where there's this friction before it is useful. And then a question of like, where does it happen? If there's like a poor center, sometimes people have like a primary place where they interact with it, and then that's not where the creativity happens. So people can be like, hey, where am I supposed to contribute? Is it Twitter? Is it the blog? Is it the Substack? Is it in Discord? Is it in YouTube? Or like, where am I supposed to contribute? And that's why a wiki works really well. It's just because it's this very defined center. One of the things that I thought about in terms of this project, and I think it's something that a lot of people in the space think about in terms of creative collaboration and creative fiction on the internet, is like, how does funding work and how do we potentially pay people? This is also where crypto has tried a bunch of times with the NFT space, trying to figure out, hey, are there ways to reward contributions in a specific way? I think the SCP works because it's partly altruistic. And I think sometimes that incentives can potentially derail contributions or just create too much overhead. People want to primarily do this not necessarily for money, but hey, if money comes afterwards in some way, then that's a bonus. But in the case of SCP, it's not perfect, right? Because the way that it's set up is that the writers make no money. The ads on the site go to the supporting to the hosting provider. They don't have a donation policy, but that you can put up your own asks for donations. Like if you're a writer, you can put on your writer's page, author's page, like, please donate if you like my writing. But like a good example of where the incentives doesn't actually work is because people are literally creating YouTube videos, monetizing them by literally just talking about ACPs. And then it has like a few million views by just talking and like adding some royalty-free images to the stuff. And then they make more money than the writers. So it's not 100%. And I think there can obviously be some improvement here, but it's never straightforward and easy, I feel. And that's always like an open-ended question about how to make this stuff work on a scale like this. At least we have proof that something like SCP can work at that big scale. But what else is possible, and how do we sort of experiment with this? In terms of like narrative protocols elsewhere, I think SCP also worked because it started off by being a very sort of containerized form of storytelling, where you were limited to a wiki page. There wasn't this expectation that you were going to have to write tales or films or video games eventually. It was just a wiki page. That's good. So it started from like a very protocol-ish perspective. But the reality is, I think these days, a lot of IPs eventually protocolize in some way in order to allow more contributions and expansion for more producers and writers. And in that sense, then the sort of core principles of those story universes become more hard-coded. The world becomes more explainable and more rigid. And then ultimately, the story world might need to reinvent itself. And I think this is something that we've sometimes, I think we're seeing is things like Star Wars and the MCU. But that being said, I think comic books have always been like really good at this because from the early days, there wasn't one true canon. Visual artists and writers could contribute their own meaning to sort of the history of a superhero. And a superhero is also a very sort of contained form of storytelling. It makes it easy to mix and match, say, teams like Avengers or and Thunderbolts and whatnot. So I think comic books have been really good at creating narrative protocols, and it's good at reinvention. And it might be that, if we look at, say, what will Star Wars look like in 20 years, it's probably not going to have one canon. And another proof of this is that some of the media that's very popular, or like I would say reasonably popular, is the in the MCU, you have the What If series, and in Star Wars, you have Star Wars Visions, which created just some of the most fresh, interesting takes on IP. And I think that will be the future. Like I think it will be a matter of time before they give some of these sort of alternate reality, alternate version perspectives on IP, and that becomes just a norm that most mega IPs just wouldn't have true canon. But time will tell. Then something else while I was writing this came to mind that I think is also an interesting way to think about narrative protocols. And when you write down all those principles of like why SCP works, it's also almost also exactly the same principles about on why internet memes also work in general. So in essence, like if you think of internet memes and narrative protocol and you follow that sort of list of recommendations, it's quite similar. Like you have open IP loosely. People don't really adhere to copyright when people make internet memes. The medium for contribution is clear because we know and understand meme formats or meme templates. In fact, there's so many sites which are just meme templates. You kind of it's always it's always there and able to contribute. It's very easy. Don't even have to fire Photoshop. There's these online tools that make you do it. In this case, it is a lot more decentralized, but usually has some locus. Like memes exist in certain communities, Reddit, or there's like memes that are just Reddit memes, mostly Twitter memes are usually just in Twitter. And the scale of contribution is also straightforward. You can contribute really quickly, but then people have created much bigger viral things around memes. And like I think one interesting example of this is the Doge meme, which is just here's a photo of a dog that eventually led to a cryptocurrency with like hundreds of millions of dollars of value, and now there's a statue of the dog in Japan somewhere. So it's like the scale of contributions is interesting here. Again, internet memes themselves is passive. You would see something, you'll notice something, go, "Ooh, I know exactly the meme to express the thing that I want to say." There is no real curation. If it's bad, it's just forgotten. And there is kind of a canonization process with memes, like sites like Know Your Meme, where if you see something you don't know what it is, you can trust it. You can probably find the answer for where this comes from on Know Your Meme. So I find this kind of parallel kind of interesting. SCP is created in a way that makes it function for a certain kind of virality. So in terms of like a conclusion for SCP, I think one of the most important things for me when I looked at it and what defined to me the most important part of why it works is because of its medium. The theme matches its medium really well. A wiki page about these anomalies in the real world that it just match. So when one thinks of a narrative protocol and want to invite collaborative or creative fiction, I think the medium matters a lot in terms of informing what story will work really well with it. So the kind of question would be, what is a narrative protocol that primarily uses social media like Twitter, or a narrative protocol that primarily uses GitHub as an information medium. So it's these kind of questions. What is the medium very good at in terms of contributing or informing a story? So yeah, I think that should be about the gist I want to share. So I think if there's time for questions, I think there is time for questions. So or discussions, Josh or Nekatish, whatever is next.
Yeah, thank you so much, Simon, for that great deep dive into SCP. Questions or comments from anybody in the audience currently? Go ahead and raise your hand. Awesome. Let's go with Dorian.
Hey there, sorry, I just got back from the pool and shoving food in my face. I missed the first little bit. I'm curious to know, like, how old is SCP?
It was started in 2007, 2008. It branched off from like a 4chan board.
Okay,
Yeah.
so pretty. So actually, I would consider that young. I guess what sort of sparked in my head was the remarks a few years ago by a couple alternate reality game design people about QAnon and how QAnon is a sort of like the most successful like transmedia alternate reality game. And I'm interested in, I guess, the sort of containment factor of SCP, like the fact that it seems to be like a, like it's got a community, but like nobody really believes it, right? Like,
yeah,
exactly. So it's just kind of like a fun thing.
Yeah.
How would that come about, I guess?
And it's interesting. Like, it's interesting to think it in context of something like QAnon. Yeah, it's interesting because SCP is very explicit about like this is not real. Like, don't think about this as real. I've on the YouTube videos, I've seen some people say I was like shit scared until I realized none of this is real. People think it's like it like refers to real things until they realize it's not. But yeah, I'll have to think on that one. I'm pretty sure some people have drawn comparisons between them. Need to see if there's anything that was said.
Veka, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I had my hand up, and one of the things weirdly that's happening with Zoom is I'm not able to turn its voiceover commentary off, so it like keeps giving me random voice instructions, like it's telling me to lower hand. So I'm trying to like exorcise this, I don't know, weird.
It's like the AI.
That's in Zoom, and I might write up an SCP about how Ghost is inhabiting my Zoom install and not letting me. This happens like in like my consulting work meetings as well with clients. Like this voice will pop up and say like all sorts of like voiceover crap, and I can't figure out how to turn it off. So anyway, yeah, this is kind of interesting, and I was trying to think about like how far back does the history of this kind of thing stretch, and how does it sort of like morph with both technology on the one hand and cultural sophistication on the other. Like if I were to make up a speculative theory, I would go all the way back to like, Julian Jaynes and the bicameral mind and the idea that ancient prehistoric people kind of literally thought the gods were talking to them in their heads. So it's a speculative thesis about like archaeohistory. But if you start there and ask, all right, you keep going, like pre-modern times, people believing in ghosts and, religious things happening all over, and quite literally, very unironically, they might believe something like a rustling in the woods is there's a ghost there or there's a demon there, right? And today, children and certain adults might believe it unironically, but most of us, for us, it's kind of like a meta thrill to believe in ghosts, or like you might walk through a graveyard and be startled, but it's not real, right? So that's the cultural dimension, I would say, has been getting ironic, but the more sophisticated the technology environment gets, the harder it is to keep up that irony. Like you can get so into like a sufficiently rich universe that you kind of forget that you started out ironic, and then it becomes like unironic participation, right? And I think this was one of the points that David Foster Wallace made in his E Unibus Plurum essay about the future of metamodernism. But the other dimension that I'm thinking about is how technology moves. Like your talk reminded me of this old James Thurber story, The Secret Life of Walter Mitty. I don't know if you guys have read it, but it's like a lovely story, but it's literally this guy who has like a wild imagination and goes around imagining that ordinary events are really about him being this super secret weird guy who has like mysterious adventures, right? So that's like very low tech. It's entirely the projective imagination of one person. Then you fast forward to things like, Pokemon Go, where you actually have some technology prosthetics allowing you to project stuff. And then you go to things like, fully immersive with a little bit of pass-through VR from like Meta. And people report that if you're actually fighting zombies in a VR game that's realistic enough, it can actually be like literally traumatizing. And I can see how enter the game in a ironic, I'm playing a game mode, but you've been playing for half an hour and suddenly it's like you've completely forgotten and you're literally fighting zombies, right? So is that like an accurate understanding of like how the historical evolution of this happened? Are there other dimensions to think about?
I think one thing, I mean, I think in the field of evolutionary psychology, which is always kind of controversial, as we don't have enough evidence, but I think one thing I read in the past about why horror and paranormal is a thing is that it was always more advantageous to be slightly cautious. Like you gave the example of the rustling in the bush, like that's abnormal, so don't go look for what is there. And I think that that's part of sort of our limbic brain response that don't go barking up trees that shouldn't be barked up. But I think one thing, a part of this discussion, which I also have like an open-ended question about, is I think part of it's also recent success. I think there's like two or three stuff that's contributed to its success. One is obviously, it started. If the wiki principle or idea didn't exist, then this wouldn't exist. So that was one contributor. The other one is that it became popular in an era where people started doing these YouTube reaction videos, and the Twitch era where people started playing games and like uploading their reactions to it. But I think the third one, which is interesting, which also there's been this rise in liminal space media where people enjoy like vaporwave, liminal space, abandoned malls kind of content. I think it might be some sense of nostalgia, but representing in a strange manner. Because the other big sort of thematically similar thing is the backrooms. So I don't know if if people don't know what the backrooms are. It is the backrooms is also like this. There's this picture which looked like some of extremely nondescript office space, but it felt like it would go on forever. And so just called the back rooms, as in like it's literally the back rooms of society and our sort of consciousness. It's just beyond our reach. It's this idea of the infinite reality IKEA, or a like infinite corridor train station kind of feeling. And that has become quite popular. People enjoy this liminal space media. I'm not 100% sure why the answer for that is. And I think it has to do with more of like how media and our current situation is, but I don't have the full answer for that. Yeah.
And just to follow up on that line of thought, it seems to me that as societies get more prosperous, they kind of actively build out more of these liminal space type elements in, like you mentioned the example of you're in a subway and you don't normally think about arcs, but if the train suddenly stops and like, the generator starts cycling or whatever, that's like a little interruption in normal reality that gives you like a narrative prompt or cue to like go off on like a speculative arc, right? And I was watching a couple of videos on Twitter recently on China's highways. They to prevent drivers from falling asleep, they have like laser
the
shows,
lasers,
basically. Yeah. That's one. And another one I saw similarly on highways. So Drew is here, he'll be interested in these urbanism examples, but many highways around the world, apparently they have musical highways, as in there's roughness there and it plays the music when you drive over it. And I'm thinking these are like, you don't even have to wear VR headsets to like experience these. Like the environment itself is like getting more surreal and prompting you into more surreal modes of thought. Like maybe the difference between like the laser right highway and the regular is, instead of people falling asleep and causing accidents, you have them basically tripping on like forced LSD type experiences. So they're like in some other alt reality, but at least they're not falling asleep and causing accidents, right? So the choice is between dangerous, mundane realities and like surreal, better realities, and it's being engineered into the environment.
Yeah, I'll just jump in because Venkat referenced me. I do think that I kind of have this overall hypothesis that like the the experience of digital and physical space is converging. So physical space is getting more virtual as digital space gets more, for lack of a better word, real. And I actually wrote a post about the back rooms recently I could send you if you're interested. But
Oh yeah,
I
please
had
do.
this theory that it's just kind of like a vague idea that one of the ideas with the back rooms is that this endlessness of the subterranean space is like a metaphor for the internet, where the internet like never ends and there's always everything you click sends you somewhere else. And that's kind of what the back rooms aesthetic is. You're just kind of wandering around and there's not really anything threatening you there, but you just are lost and you never find the end of it. That's a really bad summary of what I wrote, but I could send it to anyone who's interested.
It feels like extreme mundanity in a way.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's almost like nothing matters, or
Yeah.
it's like entropy or something like that.
It's like a fractal dimension or like a hyperbolic space or something like that. It's just like a TARDIS. It just goes on forever.
Exactly.
Timber, you had a question?
Yeah, I was wondering, do you know, two questions. Has the use of the site grown a lot over time, or is it kind of gone in waves? And then my second question is, I noticed that the authors have profiles and that you can like give them karma points or take away from that. And I was wondering if you have any thoughts about how the content upvoting system and the combination of the author upvoting, downvoting system works to like curate this content in a good way.
The first question about the popularity, I tried finding some statistics. I probably should just dig a bit deeper, but I was kind of curious if like how active it is present in the present, and people are active. Like I was researching again this weekend, and was just like people were active. There was these forums and people were writing critiques and whatever. And I think some YouTube channels built their entire audience based off SCP. So I think they won't stop, right? If because that's where their audience comes from. But it would be actually interesting to see if it was more popular at a certain point in time than today. My understanding is it's still relatively popular in a certain niche. The subreddit as well is also active. The karma points in the voting system, I did not dive deep enough to see if those are correlated with the sort of if you vote, if it adds like more votes or not on the piece. I think if I would take a guess, I think they would still probably try to stick to a principle of not prioritizing the other authors' intent with like whether this should be accepted or not. So I think it would just be your karma points probably don't matter. But I stand corrected. I need to see if that's the case or not.
Thanks.
Any last questions, comments, thoughts from people?
I felt bad interrupting the conversation about how these suspicions were keeping people safe, and now it seems like there's less of an ability to trick people into being superstitious, and now we rely on, lasers and rumble strips on highways to keep people from doing dumb stuff, rather than thinking like, oh, if you feel sleepy, it's because you've got SCP-97 breathing down your neck and you should pull over.
Yeah, no, that's true.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining us today, Simon. Really interesting topic of conversation here. We will see you guys back on November 25th for a researcher salon with Dorian Taylor. So thanks again, Simon, and
Thank you.
see you around.
That was fun.